Hello and welcome to video number 15 on the Miss Parrott channel. And today we are going to talk about a poem that is predominantly featured in The Outsiders and is a very frequently quoted line as well from The Outsiders. And that is the poem Nothing Gold Can Stay by Robert Frost. So we today are going to discuss this poem because one of the standards for 7th graders is to be able to interpret figurative language, including allusions in context. And so that's exactly what we are doing today. First, we're going to read the poem. And if you remember in chapter 5, Ponyboy actually recites this whole poem, which is 8 lines. It's not a part of a poem. The whole poem is 8 lines. And he recites it to Johnny as they are watching the sunset. Nature's first green is gold, her hardest hue to hold. Her early leaf's a flower, but only so an hour. Then leaf subsides to leaf. So Eden sank to grief, so dawn goes down to day. Nothing gold can stay. And you'll notice that I put a couple of asterisks there. That hue means color or shade, and that Eden is a reference to the garden where Adam and Eve lived in the Bible. So the next thing that we're going to do is we're actually going to analyze the poem. And the first question we're going to look at is, what does nature's first green is gold mean? What does the gold symbolize? So think of everything that comes to mind when you think of the color gold. It's typically very positive thoughts. And definitely in this poem, it's positive. When nature has its first green, it's gold, it's happiness. It is this warm feeling that we have spring and this rebirth again. Okay, so think about, in many times in literature, colors symbolize something much deeper than the color themselves, and that's true in poetry as well. The next question is her hardest hue to hold. What is the literary device, and who is her or she? So if we are thinking of nature, the environment that is the setting of this poem, who would be a her or she when you're thinking of nature and you think of the planet? Many times the planet is referred to as Mother Earth. And so this is saying that, it's very hard to hold on to the color of spring. It doesn't last very long. I think of the daffodils in my front yard, and I try to take pictures of them pretty quickly because they only last for a few weeks before they start to wilt and fade away. So, think about how in literature, many times, they give personification to things like Mother Nature, referring to Mother Nature as her or she. Also, if you look closely with this question, there is the literary device of alliteration, which we have talked about before, where the beginning sounds have the same sound. Her hardest hue to hold. So that is another literary or poetic device that Frost uses. The next question is, her early leaf's a flower. What is the literary device here, and what does this mean? So looking at this literary device, we've talked about when authors use comparisons, and sometimes those comparisons use like or as, and we know those as similes. But many times those comparisons do not have like or as, and sometimes can be even more powerful. And in this case, the comparison is made between the leaf and the flower. And even though those things are similar to each other, they're both found in nature, there's really that comparison that a leaf is the same as a flower in that it doesn't last forever. Another way that Frost is showing that all this beauty in nature is not everlasting. The next question is, what does "but only so an hour" mean, and what literary device is used? So we know that spring lasts more than an hour. So in this case, we haven't talked about this one, but exaggeration literature is usually called hyperbole. So obviously, spring lasts more than an hour, but trying to really drive home the fact that it doesn't last very long. The next question is, so Eden sank to grief. What is being alluded to, and what does this mean? So when we talk about allusions, what was being alluded to, and this is with an A, not an I. So you think of illusion like kind of a mirage, like something like an optical illusion. Allusion with an A is reference to something else in literature or history or in religion, or it could be a reference to pop culture. So in this case, I mentioned before that Eden was a reference to the garden where Adam and Eve lived in reference to the Bible. And just like we've been talking about with nature not lasting very long, as far as springtime and all the beauty, so was the case in the Garden of Eden and paradise not lasting forever for Adam and Eve. So that is what is an illusion. And in a little bit, I'm going to show you some other examples of illusion that are both in literature and just in everyday speech. The last question here is, so what is the lesson or theme that we can learn from Nothing Gold Can Stay? Just what I've been saying over and over about the impermanence of the beauty and happiness. And what I would like you to think about, and we're going to talk about this in office hours, and anyone is welcome to join tomorrow to discuss The Outsiders, because many of you are probably close to finishing or already finished with the book. But I'd like to have a discussion about why S.E. Hinton would use this poem in her book, The Outsiders, and what is its significance. Why does at the end in chapter 9, or not at the end, but close to the end in chapter 9, when Johnny says to Ponyboy, stay gold, Ponyboy, stay gold, why is that such an important line? And why is it something that is repeated in pop culture and referenced many times today? So there is a lasting meaning, and part of the reason why Outsiders has stayed, has become such a classic piece of literature. So let's talk about how allusion is used in other pieces of literature. I'm showing here Fahrenheit 451 by Ray Bradbury, and the reason I'm using that piece of literature is because, well, first of all, you are going to be reading a short story of his called The Veldt in the next few weeks. And this is Fahrenheit 451 is one of his most famous pieces of literature, a novel that includes many allusions, but I put a couple of examples here for you so you can see that it can be very powerful, and it can, instead of like having very long descriptions of what you're trying to say, sometimes you can make an allusion or a reference and people will know immediately what you're talking about. And some other good examples are just in everyday speech. And so here are some examples of what you would say or what can be used in everyday speech. And so if, for example, you call someone an Einstein, like genuinely an Einstein, not sarcastically, but you call someone an Einstein, people know what you're talking about, that you are referring to Albert Einstein and that you are really smart, or like a really good problem solver. So it's another way to give, many ways, a description without going into great detail. You can just say that one thing and people know what you're talking about. So allusions are typically well-known references, but not always. Sometimes they can be obscure and you may have to do some research to figure out what the author is referring to. So I'm looking forward to discussing the outsiders with you tomorrow, and we will discuss these questions more in depth, but especially talking about the purpose of putting this poem into the story, and some other symbols and literary devices that S.E. Hinton uses throughout the book. I hope you enjoyed reading it, and I also encourage you to try to watch the movie because it's actually pretty accurate. So I hope that everyone is doing well, and I will see you in the next video.